All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to this edition of Distinct Talks, where we are talking about electoral victory through coalition. And we are honored today to be hosting Mr. Frankline Mukwanja, who is the Executive Director of CMD, Center for Multiparty Democracy in Kenya, based in Nairobi. We are hosting Frankline because we know he's been a journalist. He has worked within civil society organizations, the development world. He has also had the opportunity to work directly with political parties. And therefore, we think that with his experience working with political parties and being Kenyan, he has seen it all. He has seen coalitions, formations come up, break up, and then re-emerge. And we are honored today to be having him as our guest as we dissect the issues of coalitions. And we hope that those that are following us online, please feel free to send in your comments, and then if any of them is a question, I'll be able to pick it and hand it over to our guest to be able to respond to. This session is powered by the Christian Democratic International Center, which is a party foundation based in Stockholm, running programs in Eastern Europe, Latin America, and East Africa. And today we are honored to talk to Frankline Mukwanja. Frankline, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Emmy, for having me. Looking forward to a robust conversation. Thank you also, River, and I hope that will be justice on it.
Yeah, so Frankline, I'm just going to jump into the conversation here. And as you're aware, pre-electoral alliances and post-election coalitions of political parties have become increasingly a significant feature of contemporary African politics. And you know, coalitions are usually formed before or after elections for a common goal of either winning an election or to form a government or to constitute a working majority in parliament. Kenya has had a good share of them ever since your first multi-party election in 1992. And you've seen the bad, the good, and sometimes maybe even the worst. And just a few hours ago, the president, Malawi has a new president, and who was an opposition leader, Mr. Lazarus Chakwera, who won in the second round. I also just came to learn that the opposition was a coalition of 9 political parties that were able to bring victory to Mr. Lazarus in Malawi. But I've also learned over time that even when we focus on coalitions as being made by those in opposition, I've also learned that governments, those in the ruling parties, also increasingly look for coalitions from some political parties within the opposition to bring them into their ranks. So issues of coalition are just not about opposition and those who want to take power, but also those who want to retain power. They attempt to bring some opposition parties into their fold. Frankline, how does this work? Why is it necessary to have coalitions, especially in contemporary African politics, where we expect a lot of the political parties to be national in character, but also to be able to marshal the power to be able to win an election single-handedly as an institution?
Very wonderful insights that inform your question, which is at the core of this conversation. Number one, I think political coalitions are a good thing generally, and they are very hard to form, and then also difficult to make. But the bottom line is, in very politically volatile countries, very politically countries that winner take it all is some days causing violence. Countries, Kenya, for instance, it makes sense for leaders to unite, talk, and go to establish, a government. And particularly, you have a mix of an electoral system that is not only a winner-take-all, but also the threshold for winning a presidential election is defined and high, like the 50+1, you know, and in countries again where you know there's pervasiveness in and dominance of ethnicity on political party, you want to be a president or a leader who can you know go across, be accepted across various ethnic groups, so that you can be able to marshal these numbers and come up with a victory that people, majority of the citizens then associate with. That is the and it's very hard for the leaders to agree on these arrangements. But then the challenge is actually it's very difficult for these leaders to stick together because after having those short-term, you know, interests of profits, you know, they have good ethnic affiliation of their leaders, and they agree. We have the Mount Kenya, for instance, and we have another grouping on the western part of the country. And the political regime, as we also explained, that either the president wants things to go through parliament or to sustain and you know, elongate themselves in power. So they don't hold together very well because of these short-term interests. The other aspect is that there is not really much ideological variance between our parties. It's obvious that they come together because of issues. They mainly come together because of the short-termness. But generally speaking, political coalitions, very highly ethnicized, you know, where there's a lot of discrimination. It's a stabilizing effect for some time, and has helped countries to navigate very difficult terrains, challenges, especially during transition politics that you know can be quite messy. That would be my observation.
No, thank you. But part of what I've seen in terms of coalitions across the continent is that there's always characters that participate in every coalition. There's usually a party leader or an individual that is always part of the coalition's conversations every other election. And it seems like experience and having been part of government or having been part of the legislature for a long time is part of the credibility that allows you to sit on that table. I've not seen a lot of young people, popular young people being in conversations about coalitions, at least in the recent past.
I think there are two aspects that we can look at. One is clearly understanding that there are political alliances that are not political coalitions. All right. So, for instance, one that was in Kenya in 1992 that moved up into the Ford party there today was generally a conversation that brought together political and civic actors to demand and push for pluralism in Kenya. But after that, there are, of course, the opportunists that then change these alliances or this movement into. Right? So when people are not properly spread across the civic, you know, actors and interests, and then begin the from or to a coalition or a political party, I think that's where the whole difficulty is. Again, the issue about port basis when the coalitions are being discussed. And therefore, if Emmy is quite a young political leader, and then you lack political support base, the question is, what are you bringing on the table? Because coalitions are mainly to be a win-win situation.
Yes.
What resources are you bringing on the table? What support base are you bringing on the table? You know, so it really takes these icons that have amassed resources, that have developed a political base for a while, bringing something to bring advantage, because you have to convince you are best. Without me, this is what you lose. You're losing this kind of wealth. So, you know, you are this focus. And that is why there always this usual suspect that remember the late minister in Kenya called Michuki was categorical that if you want to negotiate the Kikuyu community, Uhuru Kenyatta is at the entry. He will be the one opening the door, right? William Ruto, the current deputy president, had to snatch, block that has allowed him to bargain with Raila Odinga in 2007 and bargain with Uhuru Kenyatta Raila has had dominated the Western Nyanza and coast and part of northern as well. So having clear sources, with bring on the table. That is the advantage. And when you come to the level of ethnic, the pervasiveness in and dominance of ethnicity on political parties, politicians are at that level of being ethnic. They play the support role to so-called ethnic kingpins, and that is where the support base. So these two considerations are key that make it very challenging for people to arrive at that tempo. Perhaps they will be within the compound, within the house, that is, those decisions are being made, but then they are not allowed in the kitchen to get to the kitchen.
Franklin, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay. The network had gone silent a little bit, but I just wanted to make a follow-up
for my response.
Yes, I just want to make a follow-up on that conversation and the mortality rate for political parties in Kenya. And every time we have coalitions, it seems like political parties come and wind up and then make new formations. What does that mean for the sustainability of institutions and the future of democracy? Because part of what makes us believe in you as an institution is your longevity, how long you've stayed, and what kind of systems you've created. But if you have coalitions coming in and out and political parties registering and folding up, what does it mean for us who believe in institutionalism and we want to learn from institutions that have stayed and stood the test of time?
I think we have to accept, Emmy, that democratization is a process. We have to agree that as a country, or every country has to survive very treacherous political transition. But when they have done that, like the number of years that we have now practiced multi-party politics in Kenya, are we still in the political transition, or must we now force ourselves to begin a democratic transformation process? And I think that is agreed that it takes time. However, political parties remain the weakest link in the democratic development chain in Kenya, and particularly Kenya is notorious because you can see Tanzania has very well-defined political parties. Chadema and CCM are quite strong. Uganda as well has had some semblance of political party discipline with NRM and the FDC, but in Kenya there's been a lot of real high mortality, and this is mainly because of the levels of ethnicity that Kenya suffers from in terms of political organization. That's number one. Number two is that the fall of KANU in 2002 only weakened it, but it's not out of way. KANU still has a significant representation in the county assemblies and at the national level. You look at parties that emanated from 1992 when we introduced multi-party politics. Those parties are still around. The challenges that we have, that we fear, is our parties are not properly structured. They are top heavy instead of bottom heavy. So the decisions are met at the top, and there is no participation by the party membership. There is no clearly defined party membership. The functioning of these political parties as well is under a small elite. The party's leadership bases are not issue-based. They are ethnic-based, you know, and these are challenges that we have to clearly look at and say address, because they are the same challenges. If you look at the challenges that we have in terms of the coalitions, it is the inherent weaknesses of the individual parties that end up in the coalition again, because they have structural challenges, they have challenges around formation, they have challenges about their management. So all these end up in the coalition. But usually that is on one end. The other mortality issue has been, and what I would really be keen to tell my fellow East Africans is that any coalition, you must be able to interrogate the clear question of what nature of agreement are you entering into, all right? Because if you look at the reasons why NAC, for instance, the largest coalition perhaps to be pieced together and became a case study of many African political students, that brought together 15 political parties, it died the moment it was born because of the nature of the agreement. You had a lot of politicians, senior with a lot of ego, coming together, but using the so-called gentleman's agreement. So it was not binding to President Kibaki and his wing of the NAC coalition, which got into Raila's nerves because there was nothing to hold against Mwai Kibaki to implement what they agreed. And there were always different versions. This wing comes up with this version, this wing comes up. So the nature and content of an agreement when you're doing a coalition is very important. Not just the strength of the individual and affiliate parties, but you must see on the table. And the things that seem not to be important, like you have, managed to have this coalition, you have come together, you have gotten the numbers, you've reached the threshold, you have power. Are we together?
Yes.
You have power, and then simple things as sharing cabinet portfolios, diplomatic postings, coalitions about power, influence. And then when you get to the national cake, it's how you share it again. Because then those challenges come out and you hear they have been given careless portfolios. We expected this docket. We've been given something of a department. So all those things, when political leaders are negotiating, you must be very clear that this is what we are bringing on the table. This is the strength. But when we finally have arrived where we want to go, these are our expectations. So the nature and content of agreement is something else that really politicians and political party leaders should be keen on when looking at this coalition politics.
But Franklin, it also seems to me that a lot of the times when people form the coalitions, they don't discuss the end game. When we get power, this is how it needs to be shared. Maybe that is also an assumption that they don't think they are going to win the power. And then they get surprised when they get the power. And then now the fight comes to who takes what and how do you take it and what did you contribute during the campaign. Must the conversation about this is what you take when we win the election happen even before the election? Must it be part of the agreement so that we are clear? I am running for this campaign, I'm standing behind Franklin because I know that we have the Minister of Defense. Is that part of what needs to be included in the agreement?
It's foolhardy for any politician to not negotiate and be very categorical and clear on the expectations, because you are seeking power. Power is about positions, is about influence, is about resources. And you're not discussing that. You're expecting that then when someone has won the presidency, they will do you a favor. I think it's not possible. I think the biggest lesson that we can see here is how the NAC coalition was pieced together in 2002 quite hard, and how then Raila was shortchanged because he was not keen on the nature and content of the agreement. He was too, I think he was too nationalistic in approach and had a lot of goodwill. And the whole intention was send Kanu home. So by the time they came on the table, yes, he was in the cabinet and all these things, you know, but he didn't get the content and the nature of the agreement quite clear. Unlike what we saw in the 2013 coalition between URP of the former party of the deputy president and TNA that formed the Jubilee coalition before it became a political party in 2017, I think the deputy president William Ruto must have been a very tough negotiator, because if you look at the nature of appointments in the kind of portfolios that you would associate the appointees straight directly to the deputy president, you then agree that yes, this is someone who was not just keen on putting together, you know, a strong coalition, but also knew what was in it for him and how to get it. So those two are very interesting case studies, you know, when you want to look at it. And even going back to independence parties, KANU and KADU, Moi dissolved KADU because KADU was the Kenya African Democratic Union was the coalition of small ethnic groups at independence, and KANU was the political, you know, vehicle for the for the large ethnic groups. And when KADU accepted to dissolve and join KANU, you can see how Moi was able to negotiate with the old man Kenyatta and be able to get into the nerve center of the KANU power and rising to the vice president within a short period, and managing to now hold the KANU machinery all the way to 4 years. So it is foolhardy for a politician to sit and expect that let us do this. Where I come from, my uncles have a hunting background. And one of the advices that he always gave me, may he so rest in peace, was that when you go to hunt, please carry your own knife. Because when finally you have the antelope, no one is going to give you their knife. Yes, to slice your piece. So, go to hunt with your own knife.
Franklin, yes. One of the bigger problems I see in other parts of the continent when it comes to coalitions is that on the surface, we all agree that we need to have a coalition. We need to have a conversation on having a joint candidate. The problem always in a lot of other countries is who is the candidate? Because every other political party thinks that their party leader is the best candidate. How? It seems like Kenya has been successful in the last 2 or 3 elections in easily agreeing that this needs to be our candidate, and they have found a way of determining why they think that is the candidate. How has the Kenyan coalitions always managed to come up with a candidate for the coalition without necessarily a lot of fighting amongst themselves?
Emmy, it's not easy. I think what happened in 2002, for instance. First, let's even begin in 1992, when Ford was, one party after being an alliance of all civic actors and politicians, progressive politicians that were pushing for pluralism. When it came to a time of transitioning into a party and agreeing on who becomes a candidate, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, Matiba, and Mwai Kibaki could not read from the same script. And they actually went separate ways. There were attempts again towards 1997 for Amalwa Kijana, Raila Odinga, Charity Ngilu, and Mwai Kibaki again. They disagreed. But what I think drove them was that, collectively, they had more votes than the winner. For instance, I think in 97, Moi got 36% of the vote, and he became president, and the rest of the team got the 64. So that reality that if we can actually work together, then it is actually possible that we can actually pull through a win. So they had been together and failed to initially. And then the reality that we have the numbers, but we are splitting them, also was the other motivating, factor, because you have to find out what is the driving force. So the driving force was we are winning, but we are losing because we are splitting our vote. 2002 was a little bit clear because Raila had joined KANU, and Moi had somehow decided that it's not Raila who's going to fly the KANU ticket. He single-handedly decided that it's Uhuru Kenyatta that would fly the ticket. When Raila went into KANU, Mwai Kibaki and Charity Ngilu and Wamalwa Kijana started working a little bit closer. And the issue was, we need to put a number on the floor of the House so that we can do our job well as, the opposition, to be able to have a good case with the electorate. It was easy again because Mwai Kibaki had been a candidate in 91 and he came number 4. All right? So he had a political base. In 1997, Mwai Kibaki was a candidate. He came number 2 with a sizable block. Mwai Kibaki was the most experienced of the lot, has been vice president and member of parliament. So when Raila left KANU with a few of those ones that had refused to support Moi's choice of Uhuru Kenyatta, they had only 2 choices. One, run another political formation, or join forces with the Kibaki, the Kibaki grouping. And Kibaki had an advantage. He had a clear support base. He had the right experience, and he already had backed Wamalwa Kijana and backed Charity Ngilu. So, in fearing that going separatists gives Uhuru Kenyatta and Moi's KANU power, they had no choice, but to hurriedly agree and get. So it's about what are the driving forces. The driving forces here, yes, we need to see how to acquire power. We need to see, how our mutual interest, is fed. So it's a challenging exercise, but politicians have no choice. But occasionally to see that the conversation they're having is not just feeding into their interest, but also how do we make sure that our opponents are weaker and not stronger. And going separate ways, I think, would have handed KANU a clear win.
Okay, I also just wanted to throw in, you've talked a little bit about Ngilu there. I've also know that Martha Karua has been very active in coalition issues. Women. I always feel like in a lot of coalitions in African countries, women always get shortchanged unless you've already been a high-level politician. That's when they will want to have a conversation with you. Where do women stand in the issues of coalitions? Because I also feel like their issues get knocked out because they are not part of the bigger conversation.
Of course, patronage is key. Secondly, is that we are very much patriarchal as African men, and we have really made politics to be not conducive for the women. So the few that rise to the top are far and apart. And the other aspect, as I mentioned, is resources, and then the support base, right? So if you look at someone like Honorable Charity Ngilu, she had been a presidential candidate, but they share a support base ethnically with the former Vice President Kalonzo Musyoka. So when they get into these conversations, the women are disadvantaged because they are not as many at the top. The issue of the support base and the community generally, looking at women as lesser, the lesser gender is something that we need to interrogate keenly and help them come. But for the few that have been able to arrive at the table, I think they have not disappointed. Charity Ngilu has been part of 3 coalitions now in 2002, 2007, 2013, and all this. She has been able to get, I think, a fair share of the bargain. And I think the disadvantage that the women have is only the nature of the politics that we have. But I think in all occasions I've seen them, actually, the few that have reached the top have very good negotiation skills. And they have been able to get what they set out to achieve. So unless there is a deliberate effort to have more women joining and rising through the rank and file of political parties, there will be fewer on the negotiation tables, and the fewer they are, the less they get. But I think, again, in terms of how we structure our pieces of legislation, for instance, we have the two-third gender rule in Kenya, in our constitution. I think those really help. The conversation already about some minimum changes to our constitution. You can see that the issue of having either a running mate of the opposite gender when it comes to county level positions is a good insight that women need to belabor. If the executive will be expanded, I think, again, women should come out strongly and demand that those 5 or so many positions, a number of them have women candidates to balance the gender. So this need to be addressed. But again, the societal issues and cultural issues really affect them, and only grow and get better. But I reckon women that have reached up there, they're very good in terms of negotiating and getting their fair share. They arrive at the table with their own knife.
Okay. And Franklin, how do you reconcile political ideology? I mean, we want to get this guy out of power. You're center-right, I am liberal, you are social democrats. How do you reconcile this conversation when you come into a coalition and eventually come into government? Because when we come into government, my stance, my thoughts about the environment will be different from yours. My thought about social welfare will be different. How does that, how do those talks happen? And how do you reconcile that to be able to accept that I can actually go in the same coalition with people whose positions on certain issues I don't believe in?
This is one very tricky question, but I'll say this. Ideological variance between political parties is not obvious. Secondly, we have scenarios where once the coalition has been formed, the practice I have seen in Kenya is that the presidential candidate then becomes the one to inform the ideas, that and the issues that this political coalition will run on. All right, and thirdly is that we don't have very much principled. I know they are listening, but I have to say this: we do not have very much principled politicians. I'll give you an example of a country that I've interacted with quite a bit in terms of coalitions. I know Denmark has this red and blue alliance. In terms of principle, is that because we disagree, we are in the same coalition, but because we disagree with your policies as our presidential candidate, and then we will not take up positions in your cabinet, so that our party members are free to articulate their issues from their ideological standing on the floor of parliament. I don't think on this part of the world you can have that principle informing whether Emmy is going to accept a cabinet appointment or not. It's about positions, about power, it's about influence. So our political parties still are very much wanting in terms of developing issues. And I maintain the ideological variance between our parties is not obvious. So it is not even now a factor that informs coalition building, actually, because factors are simple. In the case of Kenya, for instance, it's quest for office, and the top dog must be one with the sizable, political base, you know, it has the necessary resources to also help and fund the, you know, because I have had conversations, Emmy, for instance, that I am supporting you to be president. I will be campaigning for you and running around with you. So how do I do my campaign? So you have to fund my people to do campaigns for my seat, you know, in my local area as I go with you nationally to look for the vote. It's about ethnic affiliation of leaders. It's about, you know, the fear of the winner take it all because of the electoral system. It's about, you know, the need for the political regime to change. These are the factors, more than saying that we agree. You know, we have these positions, common position on these issues. And unfortunately, I have not seen that, and I will be lying if I say that coalitions on this part of the world have been issue-based, and there are even ideological differences in terms of what kind of, you know, decisions we make as a government.
No, Franklin, I've met a politician who told me that the only principle in their life is to be unprincipled. To make sure they benefit from every situation. But then how do we move this? Because I think part of our interest, and as we try to inspire this younger generation into the future, how do we move our politics from this ethnic kind of conversation where we coalesce around, oh, this is the biggest ethnic group, we need to work with them to be able to win an election. How do we start having that conversation to move away from ethnizing the politics or focusing on religion? Oh, this guy brings the Muslim vote, we need to make sure they're part of the coalition. How do we start that conversation? Because I think eventually that's the direction we need to go.
It's a work in progress. It's not a brick and mortar thing that you can fix overnight. But I think several things need to be done. One is that we need to raise civic competence of our people. Yes, our literacy levels in East Africa are quite decent. In Kenya, for instance, it's upwards of 85. You know, but that's not the you know, the competence I'm talking about. The competence I'm talking about is the appreciation that politics affects everything that, you know, this concept I call the politics of things. That we must be able to tutor our young ones to understand that there is not any other important decision than that the civic duty to get involved and choosing the right leader for the country. We need to up their civic competence. How? I think we have very late socialization and induction of our young ones into the political arena.
Yes.
I know there are concepts that are nowadays going around, like allowing kids to elect their prefects at school nowadays, giving them time to run the campaigns and, you know, such things. But we must deliberately enter the phase of political education, get your young people inducted and socialized, you know, in politics a little bit early, so that they can be able to ask the right questions, they can be able to make the right demands and seek the answers that are deserved. The second aspect is we have left politics to a few good people and more groups. I think the Kenya has advanced over the years because there were church leaders that used their pulpit to educate people and make demands. You know, the civil society was quite active. The private sector was quite active. I think we need to get all these good, well-meaning people to appreciate that running a successful enterprise is good for the economy. Yes, people, you are a good manager, but when you do not participate in the political life of the country, then we may never be able to make the progress. So we must find a way of convincing these good people to populate political parties and put in these ideas. We have to fend off corruption, because if there is a problem that we are facing, is that the seed of corruption is actually planted in the political parties. It is not easy. And I was, even as I prepared for this conversation, I was looking at, I think it's some study by some organization in Uganda on the prevalence of voter bribery. And you know, we have basically made politics to be transactional. It is not a conversation of ideas. It's about a politician arriving and giving money. And even sometimes the good politicians, after they have laid out their ideas on how to improve people's lives and what kind of leader, their vision and all that, then you will have some very brave voters. And they ask you, Emmy, now, can you now ask us our vote? And asking what means that you have. So this issue of the culture of handouts, you know, people must realize that leadership is a reflection of society. So I don't think we are choosing the best in society to lead. And then we become so sick with their decisions and their actions when they are in office, but we don't recall how we contributed to their rising to those positions. So these are issues that we have to begin early, bring in our children to learn the right things. We have to ask everyone, you know, who's well-meaning and intentional and doing very well in other sectors, to spare time to contribute to the management, functioning and leadership of political parties. And I can see a number of those things helping us, but it will take time. Some of these countries that have advanced democracy, of course, we're nascent, some are emerging, but the ones that have developed democracy, it's been over a century. So it's not easy. Some of these countries like ours is only but 55 years of self-rule, and about 30 of them, or you know, multi-party democratic practice. Uganda, you are at your level. Tanzania is at a different level, but we're all around there between 50 and 60 years, with different levels in terms of our multi-party democracy development. But I think we need the right things. What I simply say, you see, we are not. We must first turn and face the right direction. How fast we walk, that is not the issue. But I think we must switch and stop facing the wrong direction and face the right direction. How fast we go will not matter as long as we are doing the right things. And that, I think, some of those things that I'm talking about are what I think, in my fair amount of knowledge, that we need to do to face the right direction, and then now allow the natural flow of things to maturity.
And part of that is calling upon everyone to be part of this conversation. That you need to join the politics, you need to support the process. Franklin, I mean, when you mention corruption and civic competence, I also want to bring in a little bit about civil society. I mean, in Uganda, we have an interesting trend that I've been following for the last 15 years, the last 3 elections. That ever since we got, in 1997, free universal primary education, that means from 1997 to now, our ability to read and write, people who can have the ability to read and write, has been going up. But also in the last 15 to 20 years, the money that is coming into the country for democracy, human rights, and everything is going up. But interestingly, every other presidential and parliamentary election we have more Ugandans. The number of Ugandans who don't know how to use the ballot paper keeps increasing. So we have more people can read and write, more money coming in for democracy and governance, but more Ugandans failing to use a ballot paper. So I do not know whether the problem is the Ugandans, the problem is the civic education we are talking about, and the voter education, that people still go to a ballot paper and just do not know what to do with it. They don't know whether they use a thumbprint or use a pen, or when they use a pen, they tick through 3 faces of presidential candidates. And I think the conversation needs to move even more widely, and we need to interrogate ourselves as people in civil society, whether we are doing the right thing, or we are also part of the problem in the democratization process, because these are conversations that people are usually uncomfortable talking about. What role can we play as civil society in making sure that we improve the quality of our democracy, improve the conversations when the coalitions happen. Because sometimes there is researched information like the one you're talking about, money in politics. But do we give it to political parties to understand that this is a problem? Do we share it with them and say, you need to change this direction, it is messing up the country? But also for people to know that if you put in a corrupt Emmy in parliament, it is the same corrupt Emmy who is going to put the wrong taxes that affect your business. It is the Emmy who is going to put in laws that make him perpetuate himself in power, but affect your ability to expand your business. How do we expand this conversation so that civil society becomes an active part of these coalition conversations?
Thank you, Emmy. Several things. First, let me begin with that sorry state of, spoiled votes or such. I'll give you an example. A few years back, the Law Society of Kenya was holding its elections, and it was mind-boggling the number of spoiled ballots that were declared. So this is not an ordinary voter. This is an advocate of the High Court.
He's a land fellow. A land fellow.
He's a land fellow. Yes, that tells you one thing, that it's either the voters sending a statement that they don't like those people on the ballot. Mm-hmm. Because that is when I interacted with a few of those learned fellas. That was the statement they were sending. They were unhappy with the ballot faces, yes, the faces on the ballot paper. Yeah. And therefore, the right way to do for them was to go and express that by spoiling the ballot. Mm-hmm. But then the next question obviously was, where were you when these faces were going all the way to the ballot? Mm-hmm. And that is where now the civil society comes in. Mm-hmm. That democratic development, good governance, institutionalizing the rule of law is not the responsibility of the political class alone. It's a co-creation exercise. Mm-hmm. And we must be able to document and be able to share the good stories. That, for instance, the political class, yes, takes a lot of credit, for instance, in Kenya for pushing, all this. But if you look at the history keenly, you realize that without the private sector, without the religious, community, the faith-based communities, organizations, without students, the student movements, without, the human rights movements, the political class was properly cornered by Moi's political machinery. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you need everyone. And I think what the civil society needs to learn is their work does not end with, supporting progressive politicians. Mm-hmm. They must continually exert pressure and be able to join and influence these political decisions. As long as we stop at voter education, we stop at civic education, we must move away from civic education now to civic action, because you can see the levels of literacy are there. We know that people are in a position to listen to conversations. Look, Kenya's constitution has the word public participation more than 100 times. Actually, I think it's 102 times. A lot of them is public participation. But go around those, county conversations where the budget should be people-driven, and you will see the same faces. Even now, the counties have become cleverer and they have a database. So they will invite you directly, because we don't want to go to those public barazas and engage the leadership when the opposition must. The civil society now must emphasize on civic action, that this is what is provided for. How do we take advantage of it? Because when you're not there to influence those decisions, you cannot blame those ones that were there or were taken advantage of because you felt so good and so important that cannot. I think we must change the vibe and insist that politics is too important to be left to the politicians alone. That a lot of these issues have to be done by us. We pay the taxes. We must raise these accountability levels. We must take the issues of open governance very seriously. We must put ourselves to join political parties and influence those things from inside. When a political party that has been in existence for the last 20 years gets to the day, and they know very well that they will need candidates in 2022, for instance, or chama cha, the CCM party, knows very well that they need candidates to run there. So why haven't you been able to properly organize party primaries? And then we simply become accomplices by being told we will have an identity card so you can actually vote for. Where are the members of this party? So we must question processes, we must make demands, we must meaningfully engage. I think civil society has a responsibility to continually push not just civic education, but also demand action.
Okay. Franklin, as we go to the parting shots, a couple of things that I hear from you. Political parties are one of the weakest links in the democratization process.
Yes.
Part of the ways we are going to build them is that the good people must join these political parties and help them build institutions. You've also touched on the lack of principles amongst a lot of our politicians who don't keep their word. We have also talked about the need and the understanding of the nature of agreement and coalition, the content of the coalition that you're going into. But also outside that, you've said corruption and civic competence are very critical issues that we need to think about when we are talking about coalition issues. But also, you now say that we need to move from civic education to civic action. We have focused too much on civic education. We need to inspire people to act. Now, as part of our parting shots, pointers for a good coalition, pointers for political parties who are going into elections right now in Uganda, in Tanzania, and a couple of other African countries. Some pointers for good coalitions. I know that in the last one or 2 years, the judges of Kenya have been hailed and described as very brave for having cancelled a presidential election.
Yes.
Very, very brave, because the history of how politicians behave when you stop their victory in the past was clear that when you do something like that, you lose your life. Now, the fact that your judges had the capacity and the ability and the courage to do that means that we are making progress in the democratization process, that you can cancel an election and the sitting president accepts to go back in a rerun. And I think that's a good thing for all of us. But pointers, those who want to go into coalitions, those who want to have a conversation on fielding a joint candidate, what are some of the things that they need to start looking out for? What are some of the things that they need to be talking about, and what direction should this kind of coalition take?
Right. First, a quick comment on the independence of the judiciary. I think it's good for our democracy to have all this, functioning. The executive should be a strong arm. The judiciary should, the legislature, the civil society, the media, we'll need all these institutions strong and functioning. But as the judiciary actually is deemed to becoming more independent, and you can even attest to the case that happened in Malawi, where the Constitutional Court nullified the election. President attempted to retire the Chief Justice, and the judges and the advocates came out, and he had to sit back. And then what happened a few days ago? What actually worries me now is the independence of the legislature, and that's something that as we look at strengthening our parties, we look at strengthening our multi-party democracy and building coalitions. I think it is absurd that parliamentarians cannot, for instance, choose their leader, in parliament. And it's becomes something to be dictated by the party leadership. I think it's really bothering some of us, and I have had to speak about that when you brought up. So it's something that we need. Politicians and political party leaders must allow for intra-party democracy and allow the elected leaders to express themselves and represent the people, by the way things and normally should happen in a democratic country, and a lot of, we can see the weakening of parliament in these jurisdictions. I know Uganda, you have similar challenges. Tanzania have been listening before parliament was dissolved, and those challenges. So that's the comment I wanted to make.
Yeah.
Advice on coalitions. Several things. One is coalitions are hard to form and difficult to hold together. So the politicians must be clear that you need time, to discuss on the formation, to discuss on factors, to discuss on the maintenance. That means they have to look at the structure, they have to look at the functioning, they have to look at the leadership basis of the individual parties. They also it's not a very strong relevant factor, but because that is what politics is, and that is what political parties should have, they should also look at the ideological standing of the various parties. Because then, if you have very strong political leaders, those are things that come. The other thing is to look, because politics is a game of numbers. If you have an electoral threshold for presidential, elections, also figure out that, because it will form you whom do we need and whom don't we need, so that you play up those numbers. They have to understand the driving forces. What is driving us to work together? What is the motive of us to work together? What are our objectives? Because we have different political orientations, but we must be very clear on that. They must put in place coalition management procedures so that you can survive even the formation, leave alone just holding together. So the coalition management procedures should be very clear to all, and and they must put in some time to discuss those. Coalition agreement, the nature and content. Go hunting, but remember to have your knife with you, and that should be very clear. And this nature and content is mainly about distribution of power, influence, and resources. Just don't say we will have a cabinet of 20, we will give you 5. Which ones?
Yes.
Which ones? Because when you're given 5, department, 5 cabinet portfolios that have no budget, how do you in the part of the world where political power means control and of resources, what you'll be the less, you will have no influence. So these are things that political parties have to be very keen on, and hopefully the newest coalition president, Chakwera of Malawi, I hope and pray that those 9 parties had a formidable conversation, and so that it becomes another area that really they learn from and develop. Kenya had pulled off the NAC coalition in 2002, was offering some good case study, but we are missing those ones lately because it collapsed the sooner they got into power. So that would be my advice. Focus on what is driving you, what are the motives, what are the objectives, how do you want to manage this coalition, how are you forming it, how do you maintain the relationship, and how do you share the spoils once you get there.
Thank you. Just before you leave, the character of the coalition leader. What are we looking for? What kind of leader are we looking for to hold this coalition together?
I think the driving forces, the motives and the objectives should determine, the kind of leader that the coalition picks. Because if honestly the objective is to win an election, all right, then you're not going to pick the weaker guy without a support base and without the necessary war chest to give competition. Because as a team leader, and the way politics here functions is that you need to be a man of means. You have a support base. So it depends with the objective. Once you're clear on the objective, on the motive, on the driving forces that is putting you together as political parties to form a coalition, then that becomes a little bit clear on who is the best, person to lead. I followed the conversation between your former prime minister, let me remember his name, and Mbabazi and this leader, having discussed everything, but it was clear that Amama didn't have the numbers, the support base to lead, a coalition, and I think those are things that have to be very clear. So the objectives, the motive should be clear, and then that leads you to the kind of, if it's a coalition after election and the intention is to influence the flow of the House and the kind of decisions that should be made, again, that we see becomes a totally different ballgame. And we have seen, for instance, change of leadership in the Kenya Parliament, in the Senate, and the National Assembly, out of particular interests that came into place after Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta did that famous handshake. So,
thank you, and I think it's incumbent upon party leaders that are coming into part of a coalition to accept some expert advice, opinion polls, and all these kinds that are things that are able to tell them that so and so seems to be more grounded, more popular, so that they remove this ego and accept that the right candidate has been scientifically selected according to the statistics that we have available. And then you go behind them rather than everyone wanting to be the flag bearer.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
The challenge that we have is that, yes, opinion poll is a good science for politics. But when you have the dynamics that we have in countries like ours, the ownership of those farms comes into play, the political persuasions of the researchers. So unless you're investing in a very reputable, and again, there are things that can be predetermined, because when I'm funding, an opinion poll from a reputable organization to do it, there are things, I'm a politician, there are things that we will want to,
to sway towards a certain direction, because you want to move public opinion.
Alternatively, let them do a joint nomination, like the way ODM did it in 2007. So that all these leaders compete from all their member political, the member parties, their members come in one location, and somehow that worked for Raila and company in 2007.
Franklin, we are going to get back to this conversation when the Tanzanians get close to their presidential nomination. When we get close in Uganda to our nominations, we are going to come back and have a repeat of this conversation. And this time we shall be focusing on the coalitions that will have been built and formed during that time. And then we shall try to kind of determine whether they're on the right course or they're on the wrong course. And that's a conversation that we shall have maybe 1 or 2 months from now. Thank you very much, Franklin, for sparing the time. It was a real honor hosting you on Distinct Talks, and I hope that this conversation has been helpful to all politicians that have been part of those who are viewing. Thank you very much, Franklin, and have a splendid day.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That was Frankline Mukwanja, the Executive Director of Center for Multiparty Democracy in Nairobi, taking us through a conversation on coalitions. And the big question is, when you go into a coalition, what do you bring on the table? What is your strength? That is very critical, because it is on that basis that you're able to have a conversation on what you get when the coalition wins. So we encourage all of you that are part of these conversations in trying to come up with a coalition, that the nature of the agreement and the content of the agreement is critical, because then when you win an election, you're not going to be shortchanged after that process. We thank you all very much for joining us in this conversation, and it was a great honor having Frankline Mukwanja joining us for these talks, and hopefully in the near future we shall bring him back. And we shall continue with more robust conversations in relation to politics, governance, as we go into elections across many African countries. This conversation again was powered by the Christian Democratic International Center, which is a party foundation based in Stockholm, running programs in Eastern Europe, Latin America, and East Africa. And I've been your host, Emmy Otim. Thank you all very much, and have a splendid evening.